Friends, would you please stand with me for our Bible reading today? Today I'm going to read from Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 through 14. Please look at it with me. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." This is God's word. Hear it, believe it, and live it. You may be seated. In a serious, low whisper, Mr. Beaver let the children in on a little secret. They say Aslan is on the move. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, 4 children named Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are transported to a fantastical land called Narnia, a land that is in turmoil. A wicked white witch has cast a spell on the entire place, trapping it in a perpetual state of winter. However, as these 4 children gather in the home of their new friends, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, they learn that there is hope in all of this. Now, I don't know what you would talk with a beaver if you had dinner with one, but in this situation for these kids, they hear from the beavers that though things are bleak, there is hope because Aslan is on the move. "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan. "Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. "Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood. But not often here, you understand. Never in my time or in my father's time. But the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen, all right." "Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "Aslan a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. Don't you know who the king of beasts is? Aslan is a lion, the great lion." "Oh," said Susan. "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, make no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "Then he isn't safe," said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." In this fantasy novel, C.S. Lewis is describing the hero Aslan as both dangerous yet good. That people can't help but tremble in his presence. Even though they know that he's good, even though they know that he's kind and that he's beautiful, they fear him. And perhaps you can relate to this in some way. I would imagine it's the feeling you get when you look out into something like the Grand Canyon, or maybe even up at Mount Hosmer. It's beautiful, it's breathtaking, but there's also a sense of danger, right? You definitely do not want to slip and fall down that cliff. There's beauty, there's goodness, but danger. Or maybe it's the feeling of being by the ocean or even in the middle of a large lake. There's so much beauty in it, but yet there's also so much capacity for destruction. Or it's the feeling that you might get when you shake hands with someone who's super tall or super tough, but who you know is friendly, right? A gentle giant, if you will. If you met Shaq, you would know that he's a really nice guy, really gracious guy, but there's also the understanding that all he needs to do is sit on me and I'm doomed, right? But if you're familiar with the Narnia novels, this lion Aslan that C.S. Lewis describes is a symbol for someone who's actually real. And that's God himself. That God, though he is good, is also dangerous. And we see this, and we've seen this in a passage that we've referenced a number of times in recent days. Exodus 34, 6 through 7. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. And so we see this tension, right? God is good. God is forgiving. He is gracious and merciful, but yet he's also dangerous. He is just. He pours out his wrath on the guilty. He executes judgment when it is necessary. He administers justice. And so as we look at our passage today, we're going to see these two realities once again go hand in hand. God is not safe. God is capable of mass destruction, but he is good. We are in the beginning of the end of our series on the first 15 chapters of Exodus. And today we're going to begin at the end of chapter 13. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to go ahead and turn there with me. Exodus chapter 13. Throughout the book of Exodus, it's been a wild ride. And on this Thanksgiving Day weekend, we're going to see even more action before this series is over. At this point in the series, we left off with the Exodus event, right? The massive exit of all the Israelite slaves out of the land of Egypt. In the middle of the night, the nation of Israel is set free from slavery to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and they have to pack their bags pronto. After Pharaoh's persistent stubbornness, he has finally relented and allowed the people of Israel to go free, following the mass deaths caused by the 10th plague, right? The death of the firstborn of all the Egyptians. And that's the last we hear of Pharaoh, right? That's the last we hear of the Egyptians, right? Not so fast, right? Those pesky Egyptians are still going to rear their heads one more time. They're going to come back to haunt the Israelites in a way. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at the text together. We're in Exodus chapter 13, and we're going to start in verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made all the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved from Succoth and encamped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from the people of Israel. So after he miraculously delivers them from Egypt, does God pat the Israelites on the back, say, you got this, and leave them to their own devices? No, he doesn't. As they leave Egypt and they head into the wilderness, the Lord leads them. But the way he does so is really interesting. First, God leads them, the text says, the long way around. It would have made most sense, by looking at a map, to take the main highway out of Egypt. Take I-90 out of Egypt, which the text calls the way of the land of the Philistines, or the Philistine road. It would have been convenient, but it also would have been dangerous. And not because of the Philistines, but because this road was heavily guarded by a series of Egyptian military forts. And so they certainly would have had to fight their way out. And don't get this wrong. God was fully capable of helping the Israelites be victorious. In fact, the very next generation of Israelites will be a conquering people, a people who are enabled by God to win numerous military victories. But that's not where the Israelites are at now. They're not ready for that. And God knows that even though these people are physically free, they are still enslaved in their minds. Because think about it. When you have a group of people who have been systematically oppressed, who have been in slavery for generations, where there isn't anyone in your family who even remembers knowing anyone who remembered being free, moving away from that slavery mindset and lifestyle is no small thing. And so God knows that if they immediately enter into a fierce combat, they won't be able to stomach it, and they will resort back to what they know, which is slavery. And if you read on through the time of Israel wandering in the wilderness, you will see evidence of this enslaved mindset pop up again and again. Even though God could provide them victory, and even though the people of Israel are equipped for battle, God shows them grace in his leadership by leading them away from the conflict, by taking them the long way around. And maybe you can relate in some way. Because isn't it true that God doesn't always lead us in the way that we think we should go? Sometimes God takes us the long way around in order to spare us from something our hearts wouldn't be ready for yet in that moment. Because maybe you can think of a time when you would have wanted God to give you something, but he didn't do it because it wasn't what it would have been best for you at that moment, right? He didn't give you that lucrative job, or he didn't give you that promotion when you were 25 because he knew that you wouldn't have been mature enough to handle the money, or you wouldn't have been mature enough to handle the responsibility. Or maybe he prevented you from marrying that person who you were convinced was your soulmate. But looking back at it, you're very glad that things did not work out because you know that that relationship would not have been a good fit. Sometimes God's grace is seen in him taking you the long way around. And in the case of Israel, if he doesn't lead them through the shortcut, which way does he take them? They go by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And we aren't sure where exactly the Red Sea was or where exactly this was the place he took them to at that moment, but it was probably somewhere around here. So he leads them south towards the Red Sea. And so the people make their way through the wilderness, carrying with them the bones of their ancestor Joseph, in order to fulfill an ancient promise, following whatever God takes them, wherever God takes them. But how do they know where God wants them to go? How do they know what direction God wants them to follow? Well, verse 21 says that God goes before them in a pillar of cloud and in a pillar of fire. And as we read that, you would think, wouldn't that be nice? If for every big decision that you have to make in life, God would just show up in this massive pillar of cloud and show you which direction to go. Like, which college should I go to? Well, I'll just follow the cloud. Or who should I marry? I'll just follow the cloud. Or what job should I take? Just follow the cloud, right? Wouldn't that be nice to have that kind of clarity? But in all reality, what we as Christians have now is so much better than what they had back then through that pillar of cloud. Because we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us who speaks to us through his word. And though you won't read Scripture and find every answer to life's nuanced questions, God does show you the way through the principles laid out in Scripture, but also through that small, still voice of the Holy Spirit speaking to you and directing you in the way you should go. It's not always easy to hear that. It's not always easy to figure out what exactly you should do. But with the Holy Spirit in our hearts, we know that we have a guide. But in this pre-Pentecost era, God chooses to reveal himself to the Israelites in a pillar of cloud. And why he does this and what the symbolism is behind the cloud of fire and the cloud and the fire are, we don't know for certain. But what we do know is that through this manifestation, God is showing Israel that he is with them and that he is guiding them. He goes before them. It's a visual picture that God is with them. And as the text says, God does not depart from them. The Lord is with them. The Lord is leading them. And that's good news for Israel, especially because a different sort of storm is a brewing. Let's keep reading. Look with me now at Exodus 14, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal and Zephon, and you shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh shall say to the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get the glory over Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed towards the people. And they said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers all over them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen and his army, and overtook them and camped by the sea at Pi-Hahiroth in front of Baal Zephon. So one might have thought that after all the drama and the devastation that came from the 10 plagues, that Pharaoh would have thrown in the towel and that he would have given up for good. At least that's what you would expect from a sensible person. But as the story has made clear time and time again, Pharaoh is anything but sensible. Maybe senile, but definitely not sensible. And so Pharaoh pursues the people he just let go. But unknown to Pharaoh, this is actually all a part of God's plan. Because notice how God articulates this to Moses in verse 4. First, it says, God will harden Pharaoh's heart. And we've talked about this whole idea earlier on in our series, but the word for hardening here means to strengthen. So God isn't making Pharaoh sin, but is rather strengthening Pharaoh to be more of who he already is. There's already this wickedness and this evil in Pharaoh's heart, and so God is making that more resolute. He's digging deeper. Pharaoh is digging deeper into the evil that's already in his heart. And because his heart is hard, Pharaoh will pursue the Israelites. And the reason Pharaoh does this is to attempt to give glory to himself. But who will ultimately get the glory out of this? God will. And God will get the glory because all the Egyptians shall know that he is the Lord. And this harkens back to Pharaoh's statement at the very beginning of this book. He asked Moses, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let the people go." And just like he did through the plagues, this is going to be another way that God is going to make himself known to Pharaoh and all his cronies. And so God is working behind the scenes here in Pharaoh's pursuit for his own and greater purposes. But that's what's happening behind the scenes. Because to everyone else, it looks like Pharaoh is going to dominate, because he's about to overtake the camp of the Israelites with his best 600 chariots and his massive army. Check out what happens next. Look at verse 10. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So God leads them to the Red Sea. Pharaoh pursues them, and in turn, God's followers fear what might happen to them. And I can just imagine them encamped in this valley, and them looking up at the hills, and just seeing the hordes of the Egyptians ready to annihilate them. It would be probably like that feeling that you'd have that if you were to see a tidal wave coming after you. Complete shock and utter fear. And so the people of Israel despair. And in their despair, what do? They resort to that enslaved mindset. Because look at what they say to Moses in verses 11 and 12. They say, "Moses, what's wrong with you? Why on earth would you think it's a good idea to release us from slavery? We were happy in Egypt. We were content in Egypt. In fact, when you first approached us about this crazy idea of emancipation, we told you to leave us alone. We followed you, and now look where it brought us. What a terrible idea." That's the Tommy Case translation, of course, but isn't that something? That you just imagine moments ago the people were celebrating, they were singing songs, they were laughing, they were in jubilation because of their emancipation, but now they are overwhelmed with fear and despair, and they even heap blame and curses on Moses for even trying to set them free. But you have to realize that why the Israelites despair is that from their perspective, there is no way out of this predicament. They're trapped. They're in this valley. There's water behind them. There's no escape. Even though they have just witnessed 10 astounding plagues, they still have this mindset of looking at what seems physically possible. And from that point of view, they're toast. This is the end of the road. There is no escape. They're either going to die or be re-enslaved. Have you ever looked at a time in your life like this? Has there ever been a time in your life when you looked at a daunting situation, and in that moment it felt like there was no way out? And maybe that situation's something you're going through right now. You look at the mountain of debt that you owe, or you look at your nearly empty bank account, and all you can do is just throw your hands up in despair. Or you heard the doctor's bleak diagnosis, and from the depths of hopelessness in your heart, all you could do is just hang your head and weep. Or maybe there's someone you love who is entrenched in destructive behavior, or who is far from God. And when you think about them turning their life around, when you think about them coming to Jesus, it just seems impossible. My guess is that we've all been there before. And maybe some of us are in that kind of situation right now. But let's go even further with it, because why are the Israelites in this situation? Why are they in this hopeless circumstance? They're there because they followed God's lead. Have you ever been in a tough situation because you were trying to be obedient to God? Like maybe the reason why your bank account is empty is because you've been trying to be generous. You've been trying to tithe. You've been trying to give to those who are in need. Or maybe there's a conflict with people in your family, someone in your family who you confronted, or a friend that you confronted who was a Christian about some sin in their life, and now there's tension between the two of you because you were just trying to do what you felt like was right. In those sorts of circumstances, it can be so difficult to not get bitter with God, or to try to blame Him, or even blame him for the good things that have happened in your life up to that point. Sometimes we too would rather go back to Egypt, we'd rather go back to comfort, or even we'd rather go back to sin than struggle through the costs of being obedient to God's will. But no matter how you got there, when you're in trouble, all of us are tempted and often give in to this sense of being paralyzed by fear. But the good news for us, and the good news for the Israelites, is that God hasn't left them yet. He is still by their side, and he is still leading them. Because listen to Moses' response to the Israelites in verse 13. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So in the face of daunting circumstances, the Lord leads his people once again. Moses assures the Israelites that even in this terrifying moment, they don't need to be afraid. He says, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, because the Lord will fight for you." Moses reminds them of this fact, that God is on their side. He tells the Israelites that God and God alone is going to save them from this predicament. They won't be able to take any credit, because God alone will receive the glory. Because God repeats in verse 17 what he said earlier. He is going to be the one to harden Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh's going to pursue, and from that, God will get the glory. And so all Israel has to do is sit back, relax, and watch it all go down. Perhaps this is a reminder to you not to allow yourself, and for me, not to allow myself to become so overcome with despair that we forget who is on your side. We serve a good and gracious and great God. He is all-powerful and more than capable of delivering you. He cares for you. As Jesus himself says, if God takes care of the birds, how much more does he care for you? I know sometimes, even in my own despair, if I'm anxious about something, if I'm nervous about something, I will forget to do something even as basic as pray. I will forget that in that moment, I have a God who can hear me, who will listen to me, and I just need to pray. And just to be clear, what I don't mean by that is that if you pray to God, that God's going to automatically pay all your bills, or that he's automatically going to heal that illness, or he's automatically going to remove all the negative consequences from any bad or even from any good choices you've made. But what it does mean that if you trust in him, he is going to see you through the fire. He's going to see you through the waters. God will lead his people. And in the case of the Israelites, he leads them in a pretty miraculous way. First, interestingly, he leads them not by going before them, but actually by going behind them. We're told in verse 19 that God protects the people by shifting the pillar of cloud, this manifestation of his presence, to be around the Egyptian army so that they can't attack. And then what happens? God instructs Moses to simply stretch out his hand over the sea, and through a display of God's power, divides it in two, making a dry land highway just wide enough for the people of Israel to waltz right through on dry land. I imagine it would have been pretty terrifying to walk between these two massive walls of water. But given the alternative of being massacred by the Egyptians, I'm sure the people were pretty eager to do what God would want them to do. Through the 10 plagues, God demonstrated his sovereignty over nature. And he does so again, but this time it is an act of wonder and of salvation, at least for the Israelites. Because for the Egyptians, this division of the waters is arguably the worst plague of all. Well, let's read what happens next. Look at verse 23. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." And so Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Lord leads, and once again Pharaoh pursues. The Egyptian hordes go full speed after the Israelites in the depths of the now parted Red Sea. Pharaoh's pride and his rage compel him to send his army into an obviously dangerous situation. Whether he went with his army or stayed back, we're not 100% certain. But in any case, once the Egyptians get into the sea, they aren't able to catch up to the Israelites because some chaos breaks out, right? First, the cloud of the pillar of the presence of God returns again, driving everyone into a frenzy, right? The horses get spooked, the people get scared, there's chaos. And as the chariots start going wild, the wheels start getting all clogged up in the muddy ground. And because of this, the Egyptians get understandably scared, and they want to retreat because they have seen firsthand how God is fighting for the Israelites. But they've gotten themselves into this mess. And they're in the middle of the Red Sea. And while they're there, God commands Moses to stretch out his hand once more, and this causes the sea to collapse on top of the Egyptians, drowning the entire army. It was one thing for the Israelites to be freed from slavery. That they were freed from slavery from their enemy of the Egyptians, but now it's a whole nother thing that the entire risk of re-enslavement is gone. Their enemy has been completely wiped out. Now they are truly free, as they no longer have this threat of re-enslavement. And perhaps surprisingly, this realization causes the Israelites to once again be afraid, to once again fear, but not in the way they did before. Let's finish the chapter. Look at verse 30. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. The followers of the Lord fear once again. But the kind of fear they experience this time is different. Because in this instance, they have witnessed, yet again, God's ability to completely destroy a massive group of people while protecting them from the same fate. They saw it with God killing all the Egyptian firstborn, but sparing theirs. And now they see it by God letting them pass through the divided sea unscathed, but yet crashing the waves onto the Egyptians, killing them all. The same Red Sea that was their salvation was the death of all the Egyptians. And the image that's painted for us here is actually pretty graphic. In the aftermath of this mass drowning, they begin to see the bodies of the Egyptians wash up on the seashore. And I'm sure that would have been a really disturbing sight for all the Israelites to see. But ultimately, in God doing this, God is enacting once and for all his judgment and is administering his justice on the people of Egypt. The injustice of his people's enslavement has been avenged. The Egyptians who had every intention of re-enslaving the Israelites and maybe even killing them have met the very end they had inflicted on them for so many years. And so the dead bodies along the seashore are a visual reminder to the people of Israel that their God is powerful and dangerous. But thankfully, he is also good and he's on their side. It harkens back to the description of Aslan from the beginning. God is anything but safe, but he's good. He is very good, looking out for justice and for the well-being of his people. And so what do the Israelites do? Verse 31, Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. They feared God. And I think some of that is a literal fear, that they trembled, they were afraid about what had just happened. But there's also the sense of awe, of reverence, and respect for who God is. That without them lifting a finger, God single-handedly delivered them from the hand of the Egyptians. And so they revere God. They believe in him, and they believe in the man that God has chosen to be their leader, Moses. And that would be a great end of the story. But it definitely doesn't end there, right? We won't have time to get into it in our series, but unfortunately their fear of the Lord doesn't last very long. But we'll have to save that for a different series at a different time. In the meantime, though, would you please pray with me as we end our time together in worship? God, we thank you for this simple reminder that you are not safe. But God, you are good. God, we thank you that you administer justice. But God, we thank you that you are slow to anger, that you are merciful, that you're gracious, and that, God, even though we all deserve justice, we all deserve punishment for our sin, you made a way where there seemed to be no way. Just like you did with the Israelites by parting the Red Sea, making a way where there wasn't a way, God, you made a way for us by sending your son Jesus to die in our place. God, we thank you for that truth. We thank you that we can be freed from slavery to sin, that we can be released from the penalty of sin by believing in you, by coming to you, accepting you as our Lord and Savior. God, we thank you and praise you for that. God, we lift up your name as we prepare to leave this place. It's in your name we do pray. Amen.